While flying squad detectives were desperately trying to trace the source of the mysterious radio message and checking on hundreds of banks within a 10-mile radius of the West End of London, a gang was coolly and calmly smashing its way through the floor of the bank vaults of this branch of Lloyd's here at the junction of Baker Street and Marylebone. Altogether, 700 banks were checked, including this one.
During the early 1970s, Britain was facing financial hardship with unemployment on the rise and economic growth on the downturn. The criminal underworld began to look for ways to buck the trend, and an enterprising criminal by the name of Anthony Gavin, a 38-year-old photographer from North London, had just the idea. His plan was inspired by The Red-Headed League, an 1891 Sherlock Holmes story. Although Gavin was a career criminal, he wasn't your average petty thief. He'd had military training in the British Army Royal Fusiliers, which made him disciplined and intelligent. To achieve such a feat, Gavin knew he required skilled accomplices. Firstly, he needed someone who could map out the vault, experts who could help him dig the tunnel, and finally, someone clever enough to disable the trembler alarms. His first recruit was Reginald Tucker, somebody unknown to the police with a clean record, the perfect man for reconnaissance. Next on board was Thomas Stevens, a second-hand car salesman, another man without any brushes with the law who could acquire the tools necessary for the break-in. Next came trusted friend Mickey Skinny Gervais, a man with expert knowledge of burglar alarms. Finally, Gavin needed a lookout. Enter criminal associate Bobby Mills. In December 1970, Tucker posed as a well-to-do member of British society and opened an account at the Lloyds Bank at 185 Baker Street in the Marylebone district of the City of Westminster, London, under a false name, depositing £500 in the process. A couple of months later, he rented a safety deposit box at the branch and began scouting out the vault with regular visits to his new box. Bank practice of the time was for staff to leave customers in private while visiting the vault. Tucker measured the vault with an umbrella he carried and the span of his arms. He was aided in getting exact measurements by the regularly sized floor tiles, each of which was 9 inches square. He drew a map of the room, plotting where the cabinets were and the position of the furniture. Meanwhile, Stevens gathered all the tools the team would need, including sourcing a thermal lance, a 100-ton jack, and explosives to help the gang bust through the cement flooring of the vault. The team also needed a starting point, and in May 1971, they were delivered a gift, a leather goods shop named Le Sac, just 2 doors down from the bank closed. The property even came with a basement that the gang believed was aligned with the level of the bank vault and was separated by just 40 feet. The closing business agreed to sell the lease for £10,000 to a 64-year-old man called Benjamin Wolfe, an associate for Gavin. The last hurdle to overcome was the bank's trembler alarms, and once again, timing was everything for the gang. In late summer 1971, roadworks in the area had caused the alarms to go off falsely several times, and so they were eventually turned off whilst the works continued. A member of the local security company alerted the gang of the timing of the digging, and when the alarms were off, the gang then pounced on the opportunity to put their plan into motion. Digging began from their newly acquired premises on the Friday evening of the August bank holiday 1971, with the gang choosing to dig at weekends so as not to be overhead. Bobby Mills took up position on a nearby roof overlooking the bank and communicated everything he saw to the team via walkie-talkie. With the lookout in place, the men in the tunnel got to work. Gavin led the digging of the tunnel from Le Sac to under the vault floor. Gavin dug until he reached the walls of the Chicken Inn's basement, then dug down and continued under the building, using their basement floor as the roof of the tunnel. The entry hole he, Tucker, and a third gang member created in Le Sac was 15 inches wide and through 6 inches of concrete. In a remarkable feat of engineering, the team created a structurally sound tunnel that eventually led them right under the bank vault. Late on Friday, the 10th of September, they began their assault on the vault. With the bank shut for the weekend, they knew they had until Monday morning to get in and grab as much loot as they could. The men worked with the 100-ton jack once they reached under the vault floor. What they did not know was that there was an old well under where the tunnel ended, and the pressure of the jack pushed the bottom of their tunnel down into the well, rather than raising the vault's floor upwards. When that failed to punch a hole in the vault's cement flooring, they tried the thermic lance. When that too failed, they went to their final option, explosives. They drilled holes in the underside of the vault floor and packed them with gelignite. Coordinating the explosion with traffic outside to mask the noise, the potentially disastrous strategy paid off, and the gang finally had a hole into the vault. The tunnel was 40 feet, which is 12 meters long when finished. The digging created 8 long tons of waste, which was hauled back into the sack and dumped towards the rear of the premises. The tunnel, which needed no supports, was later described in court as a magnificent piece of engineering. Unbeknownst to the gang, an amateur radio enthusiast in the area began picking up their walkie-talkie conversations. He tuned in at the moment the gang bust into the vault. The fumes and dust kicked up by the explosion made working conditions inside the vault unexpectedly difficult, and so the gang debated over their radios what to do next. Crack on that night, or take a break and return a few hours later when quite literally the dust had settled? They chose the latter. After hearing this, Robert Rowlands called his local police at around 11 p.m. on Saturday, the 11th of September, to tell them what he'd been hearing. They brushed him off, but suggested he records the conversations. He used a small cassette recorder to record the conversation between the burglars.
Right, well, listen carefully. We want you to mind for 1 hour from now until approximately 1 o'clock, and then to go off the air, get some sleep, and come on the air with both radios at 6 o'clock in the morning.
I suggest we carry on tonight, mate, and get it done with.
Look, the place is filled with fumes where we was cutting, and if the security come in and smell the fumes, we are all going to take stoppo and none of us have got nothing. Whereas this way, we have all got 300 grand to cut up when we come back in the morning, and if security have nosed it for us, well, at least we have got something.
The disagreement between the lookout and gang continued for a while, and the lookout said,
Money may be your god, but it's not mine, and I'm off.
Eventually, after input from a woman's voice and a fourth person who seemed to carry more sway than the others, the lookout agreed to remain on the roof overnight. The lookout man was also given an update on the progress they had made in opening the safety deposit boxes.
We have done 90% of the easy ones, and we now face the hard ones.
At 2 a.m., Rowlands decided he had enough material recorded to call the police again. He did not recontact his local station, but phoned Scotland Yard directly. Scotland Yard sent members of the flying squad to listen to the tapes, and they confirmed that they thought a burglary was taking place. The officers stayed with Rowlands until 8:30 a.m. on Sunday the 12th of September, when the gang returned to the shop and radioed the lookout. One of the gang members in the shop thanked Bobby Mills for staying on the roof all night and informed him that they planned to finish the job early that afternoon. Shortly afterwards, Rowlands and listening policemen heard the final radio transmission.
Would you like to change to the other channel? Over.
Rowlands thinks this was the code for leaving the bank. This time, the police decided to act on it and contacted all the banks in the surrounding area, requesting them to open their branches right away and inspect the vaults. Unbelievably, in mid-afternoon on Sunday, the 12th of September, police officers stood at the vault door of Lloyd's Bank at 187 Baker Street, and after seeing it undisturbed, they moved on to inspect the next bank. The gang inside breathed a sigh of relief. After 30 hours in the vault, cracking safety deposit boxes open, the gang emptied 268 safety deposit boxes and made their escape, carrying with them money and property valued somewhere in the region of £500,000 to £3 million. That's around 9 to 54 million pounds in today's money. Initially, a news blackout was imposed on the radio messages to avoid letting the burglars know their conversations had been overheard by the police, but this was lifted by Monday, the 13th of September. On that Monday morning, bank employees discovered the vault had been breached and reported it to the police. Police found the thermal lance, walkie-talkies, and other tools, including an oxyacetylene torch, in the shop. 800 pieces of evidence were logged and forensically examined. Police announced that they were searching for 4 men and a woman. They thought that during the burglary, the woman was acting as a controller, based in a different location to the lookout and the gang. The police later widened their search to include 5 others. The bank provided the police with the names of 260 box owners. 8 others refused to allow their names to be passed on. Scotland Yard put over 100 detectives on the case and the investigation. They were organized into 4 teams, one examining the scene, one contacting the known safety box owners, one covering the coordination from the control center, and one team dealing with all external inquiries. This quickly led them to Benjamin Wolfe, the man whose name was on the lease to the property 2 doors down. Although he denied knowledge of the crime and was released after questioning, he was placed under surveillance. Within 4 days, the police had a list of likely suspects that they were investigating. Informers provided the first names of 2 of the gang members and incomplete details of a pub that had been taken over by another member. Police made the connection between a newly acquired pub and Gavin. After several weeks of surveillance and investigation, police had identified Wolfe, Gavin, Stevens, and Tucker as the key individuals to arrest, but they also wanted to speak to 3 or 4 other people who they thought were involved. One of those they were interested in had been living in France and Italy since October 1971. There were no extradition agreements in place to request overseas police arrange for his return to Britain. Towards the end of October 1971, police surveillance teams saw Tucker hand over a bag to 2 men, Abdullah Hassan Gangji and his nephew Akbar Mohammed Ali Gangji. The 2 were arrested and 32,000 pounds of notes were seized. Wolf, Gavin, Stevens, and Tucker were also picked up within the next 2 days. Police recovered 231,000 pounds they identified as stolen from the vault. After the end of the investigation, Scotland Yard considered prosecuting Rowlands under the Wireless Telegraphy Act 1967 for listening to unlicensed transmissions, but no charges were laid against him. Shortly after the court case, Lloyds Bank sent him a check for £2,500 to thank him for his actions. The 2 Gangjis were remanded in custody until the 16th of November, when bail was set at £75,000. Tucker, Gavin, and Stevens were all remanded on bail of £30,000 each on charges relating to the break-in. Shortly afterwards, the bank's insurers offered a £30,000 reward for information that would lead to more arrests. The trial of the 4 gang members and the 2 Gangjis opened on the 2nd of January 1973. Stevens, Tucker, Wolf, and Gavin were charged with breaking into the bank and stealing the contents of the security boxes, valued at a minimum of £1.5 million, and of possessing explosives. The 2 Gangjis were charged with handling stolen goods. The 2 Gangjis stated that they were acting as couriers for a Swiss-based finance house involved in purchasing sterling. Wolf claimed that after he signed the lease for Lassac, he had only returned to the shop once to pick up the post, and that he was shocked to hear the news about the break-in. The trial ended on the 23rd of January 1973, and sentences were handed down 3 days later. The 2 Gangjis were found not guilty. Stevens, Tucker, and Gavin were each given sentences of 12 years. Wolf received 8 years, shorter than the others on account of his age. As for Mickey Gervais and the other unnamed accomplices, they disappeared into thin air. 2 men were also never identified, namely Little Legs and TH. They continued to search for other members of the gang, including 1 woman, for 5 years, but no further arrests were made. The police only ever recovered around £200,000 of the stolen loot. After the robbery, the rumor mill went into overdrive with speculation of a governmental press censorship. Theories circulated about police corruption connected to the case, and people pondered what exactly the gang had found in those safety deposit boxes. One theory suggested they'd come across compromising photos of Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, as well as incriminating pictures of a serving Tory cabinet minister abusing young children. Adding fuel to the fire is the fact that a great deal of the documentation around the police investigation has been placed under embargo at the National Archives and won't be released until January 2071. Is there a cover-up? Why is this still a national secret? Only time will tell.